Hello and welcome to Geetika Ki Canadian Diary. We have a new episode, but my guest is a familiar face and voice to many of the listeners and viewers of my podcast. Michael Braithwaite, President and CEO of Jack.org. Thank you for joining me again today, Michael.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It is November. I don't like less daylight and cloudy days already beginning. It is Movember. So for those of us who do not know what it stands for, what it is about, can you please educate us?
About Movember. So Movember is an organization that started fairly small. It was a bunch of guys actually who just grew mustaches and thought we're going to give back to cancer. And I think it was what is that? And it grew so big. Now it's worldwide, and they really are now their broad focus is just men's health, right? So they'll go men's mental health as well as prostate cancer and a number of other things, and they raise millions every year in the month of November. And traditionally, people start growing their mo on the 1st of November, and they keep it on for the month. I obviously have been growing mine for longer, but it's a great way just to have some fun with it, raise a lot of money, and do a lot of good.
Yeah, also to reflect on your brothers and fathers and sons and see where they can get help. And just sometimes it's just kind words, and not to be always saying, oh, you're a boy, be brave. I know that we live in an open conversation world, but I also feel we do not at the same time, and walking on eggshells all the time, all day long. What to say, finding balance between what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Even as an adult, I have to think twice. Like I'm a weird Torontonian who stops and smiles and says hello to people. And then I'm sometimes thinking to myself, did I ask the right question if I said you're wearing a nice dress, or I like your dialect, or I like your language? And I'm thinking, how are we giving room to be children or teenagers, to our 13-year-old boys, 17-year-old boys? Because our expectation or the message to them is, you should know better, be careful, always do the right thing. Isn't that causing anxiety and stress all the time? How are they growing up?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just even as a stat around that, our men and young boys, their level of suicide are much higher than females, right? And I think it is traditionally men have been told to kind of just keep it inside, don't be a man, tough it through. Mental, like expressing, your needs around mental health is seen as a weakness. You've got to be strong. You've got to do that. And I think, thankfully, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of very influential males, which is great, that are coming forward and talking about their challenges with their mental health. And some of the people that, the strongest people, the athletes and others who say, you don't have to suffer in silence. You need to talk about this. It doesn't make you any less of a man to talk about health. If your physical health was ailing, you would talk about it, but why, is it such a shame or secret to talk about your mental health? That's cultural as well. At, Jack.org, we've talked with groups around the world who talk about culturally, mental health is either, just not something they talk about or is seen as shameful. We had a group in from Taiwan government, and they were talking about that they have free psychotherapy, which is incredible, right? Like for that access, that tool to be accessed and to have free service around it. They said that the tough part is, not many people use it because it's seen as shameful to the family, right? So they've got to work on that, kind of overcoming the stigma even more so. But I think, if we can get that message out to all youth, but especially young men, that you are not alone, that it is normal, and that you don't have to suffer in silence.
Yeah. As you said, Canada, I think, especially Ontario, there's immigrant communities all around. When you look around, we bring deeply rooted beliefs, cultural myths, and attitudes towards mental health, especially when it comes to men or boys in our families. We don't want them to be saying anything about that. And in many households, children are still told, don't complain, be grateful, work hard, and it's just hormones, it will be fine. So when you hear that as a 14 or a 15-year-old, I would think that there's little room for open conversation from that child anymore. They're going to shut down, and that's going to cause stress and anxiety. And there's a lot of pressure to do best and better and be perfect already in our society for everything. So how would you guide, or what would you suggest? How can we foster culturally sensitive conversations that actually reach families, schools, and communities, especially who need the most?
Well, I'm glad you asked that too, and it really speaks to the work of my organization, Jack.org, and that we do. Because if I looked so the history of Jack.org in 2010, Jack, who the organization is named after, he went away to school at Queen's University, and Jack was a high achiever, came from a really close-knit, great family, but Jack started showing signs of mental health, right? And he was challenged. His mental health was kind of spiraling, and I think his friends noticed something was different. They didn't know what to do. Jack didn't know what to do. He saw himself as I'm failing. What am I going to do? If I'm not academic, or I'm not getting really good grades, then who am I? And he associated, his sense. And sadly, Jack died by suicide. And when his parents found out, they were shocked. They had no idea. I don't know. He didn't tell us. He didn't do. So it's that kind of silence thing. He didn't know what to do with it. So what we do, and we found was the best way forward, is quite often as parents, adults, and others talk to kids, they're not seen, or younger people, they're not seen as relatable, right? So when I tell my daughters, hey, here's my thoughts on, they might tune it out a little bit because they're like, what can this guy possibly know about what I'm going through, right? He's not female, B, he's old, so they can't possibly, so I'm not relatable. So we have this model of peer-to-peer, right? So we try to equip younger people with the tools to support one another when they're going through that. So what if, you see your friend and you see that they're not showing up to school every day, or their behavior is altered some way. And so we have a number of programs, but one of them is the Be There certificate, right? And that is, when you take this Be There certificate, it sticks to kind of 5 golden rules, like 5 simple principles that can help you start those conversations. And the first one is say what you see, right? So if I see, something's going on, and say, hey, I see you're not showing up, whatever, and that's concerning because you're always here. Well, like, what's going on? And they talk about being a real listener. I think even as parents, our first kind of thought when something's wrong with our children is to try and fix them, right? Like get into fix mode instead of just get into listening mode, right? And then as well, how do you do that in a safe way? Because you're not a therapist, you're not there to diagnose, you're not quality, so you have to know your role and do it safely for yourself as well. And if they need more help beyond you, then some people are good with that conversation. I'm not alone. You understand me. Thanks for listening. Others might need more help, and then you help them navigate the system. So that's kind of the 5 golden rules around the Be There certificate that we do, and that's free for youth to access. But here's what we found out too, is that it's kind of like Ozempic is, of course, primarily a diabetic drug, but it's more widely known now as a weight loss drug, right? As a side effect, it's like, I can lose a lot of weight. Then they couldn't keep up with the demand. What we found with the Be There certificate is, although it is targeted at youth, we found parents and people that work with youth have been taking the certificate because it teaches them how to start those conversations, how to have the conversations, how to do that, and why not. And we thought, what a great thing to happen, because we, beyond young people peer-to-peer, if we can create this larger ecosystem where people are having the conversations, we prevent them from going into crisis, hopefully, or many, and we get people the help they need, right? So I think using tools like that work upstream, work to prevent early on when you see those signs, and we're giving people the tools to have those conversations and in that kind of preventative mode.
Sometimes I feel, Michael, that parents are also hesitant. As I said, they're coming from different parts of the world. They have their own ideas and fears and beliefs. So just to even come up and say to the school system, or maybe like my child seems to be having some trouble, they kind of get a little not sure, how is the school system going to take this, or they may like label my child for something, and then I may not be able to step in and help them. So what do we do about that? I mean, to be honest, I think that fear for some parents is probably real. Like they don't know the system,
of course.
and they see the stories around. It's like, okay, I don't want my child to be labeled. I just want a little bit of help.
Labeling's true, right? I had a friend, well, I wouldn't say he's a friend. I knew someone growing up, and this guy was a star athlete. He played football at the college level, just seemed to have everything going for him, right? And he was a police officer, and sadly, he died by suicide many years ago. And his parents said, as a police officer, similar to that, he didn't want to disclose that he had mental health issues because he'd be sidelined, right? You're labeled, as you said, you're sidelined, and he didn't want to be behind a desk. He wanted to be doing so similar. The fear of, if we disclose this, what's going to happen? How's that information going to be used? Are we going to be targeted? Are we going to? And I think schools have gotten a lot. Like schools are gotten a lot better. And in fact, like we look at part of the work we do at jack.org is we have something called Jack chapters that are in schools where we create these spaces for young people who really decide how they're going to deal with mental health and how the school should, and give the school advice around it. So it's young people for young people to create those spaces. So if that parent sees that the school welcomes the Jack chapter, I think they're going to feel a little safer in having those conversations. What we also do too is we train over 100 youth every year as Jack Talk speakers, and they are from all cultural backgrounds and different backgrounds. We have youth that have experienced homelessness, and youth from the 2S LGBTQ plus community, youth who are Indigenous, youth from Black communities, right, that are traditionally overrepresented when it comes to, mostly due to lack of access to services with mental health challenges, right? And we train all the, and in talking to some of those individuals, those young people who are speakers, they'll talk about how their duty is, yes, to go out and talk to young people about it, but they're also trying to change those conversations within their own cultures, right? So we have a podcast called Jack Amplified, and I have those conversations, and I talked with a young Iranian woman who said, not only, and she's saying that a lot of people are open to it because they see that. So not only is she trying to change the conversation among youth, but within the culture as well. And so I think as we kind of equip and empower these young people, they're the ones who are going to change the future kind of moving forward and change those conversations and kind of normalize them so we don't kind of have to hide in the shadows or think it's shameful.
This is amazing. Thank you for sharing all the work that your organization is doing, Michael. So much appreciated. I'm curious to hear your perspective on how experts and policymakers in Ontario are approaching these challenges.
Well, I think we were so lucky. We've got some incredibly great and talented people working on this in our province, right? And we've got groups at CAMH and Kids Help Phone and the Mental Health Commission of Canada and Mental Health Research Canada. So we've got all these groups doing incredible work, right? Even at Sick Kids, they're doing, so they're pushing the government. I think, we underinvest. We still aren't at a point where when we talk about health, mental health is on that same kind of level, right? Like there's health, well, then there's mental health.
Yep.
But we have to see mental health as health.
Yeah.
And when we say if we were in a, we were in a pandemic, right? That was health. And we threw tons of resources at it. It was unacceptable. We wanted to get out of this. People were dying. Well, look at the suicide rate. I mean, I think the recent, UNICEF report showed that Canada is in the kind of bottom third of countries when it comes to youth suicide rates. And so this is a crisis. And so why are we not throwing the kind of resources, and why are we not creating policies that address the crisis that we find ourselves in, right? And I think there's some smart people pushing for that. We have to do more. Our young people are dying unnecessarily. And we also have to stop only just focusing on the crisis at hand, but also look upstream to say, if we just are always responding to something, it will never stop. You have to work upstream to really start at the beginning. So what are we doing? What things are we putting into place so it never spirals into that crisis?
So true. For the viewers and listeners, can we repeat what is the actual website? Jack.org.
Jack.org.
And how can
it's also our name, but also the website.
Yes, it is the name and the website. So if anybody has to reach jack.org, how do they do that? Just go on the website, figure out the contact, or?
Yeah, there's all sorts of, depending on what you want to do. So the website is well designed. Let's say you say, hey, I want to go on and do that Be There certificate. It only takes 2 to 3 hours. You come back to it, just look for the Be There certificate. If you wanted to start a chapter in your school, if you wanted to become a Jack Talk speaker, you wanted to donate, all those things are pretty intuitive when you're on there. What I will say, just for clarity too, is that we're not crisis response. So if you're in crisis, jack.org, that website is not going to be the one to go to, although you'll find resources there that will point you to the right resources. So Kids Help Phone is that crisis, CAMH, those different pieces, absolutely, and those are necessary going forward, right? So that is where you go. Well, one other thing we do as well, as you mentioned, schools too. In school, every kid is in school at some point or another, even if it's homeschooling, and so with Public Health Canada a couple of years ago, we were able to create something called EdHub. And what that is it's resources for teachers. Because even during the pandemic, what we found is that parents were saying mental health was at its crisis for young people, and it continues to be. But they were saying, can you help my kids? They're saying the teachers are expected to be everything to everyone. Teachers, I don't have the resources. This is a resource for teachers, and it kind of blends in their curriculum that supports teachers in supporting young people in their classrooms, right? To make it a little easier for them, to give them the resources to do exactly that. And so teachers can go to our website to sign up and access the EdHub as well.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your insight on such critical issues. I think mental health is not just mental health, it's overall well-being for everybody. And 100%. I mean like for everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Take care.
Thank you.